United Kingdom 2024. Part 1. The Streets of Manchester. Manchester, a city where history and modernity coexist in a vibrant tapestry, was a place of contrasts. The towering spires of old churches cast long shadows over bustling markets, where vendors shouted out their wares, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh bread, spices, and the occasional whiff of exhaust from passing buses. It was in this very heart of the city, where the old met the new, that a young woman named Emily found her place, a spot on the worn cobblestones of St. Anne's Square. Emily had been born into a world of hardship. Her family, though rich in love, had always struggled financially. They lived in a small, cramped flat on the outskirts of the city, where peeling wallpaper and drafty windows were a constant reminder of their situation. Her parents, both devout Christians, had instilled in Emily a deep and abiding faith from a young age. It was this faith that sustained her, even when life seemed unbearably difficult. From the moment she was born, it was clear that Emily was different. She came into the world without the use of her legs, a condition that doctors could not explain or cure. For her parents, it was a devastating blow, but they never let it diminish their love for her. Instead, they saw her as a gift from God, a child who would be special in ways they could not yet understand. As a child, Emily had often felt the weight of her disability. She watched other children run and play, their laughter echoing through the streets, while she sat on the sidelines, confined to her wheelchair. But rather than succumbing to bitterness, Emily turned to the one thing that brought her solace: music. Her mother had a small, old piano, its keys yellowed with age, and it was here that Emily first discovered her love for singing. Her voice, even at a young age, was something extraordinary. It had a clarity and purity that could quiet a room, drawing listeners into the emotion behind every note. Emily's parents, recognizing her gift, encouraged her to use it for the glory of God. They would gather around the piano each evening, singing hymns together, their voices rising in harmony as they gave thanks for the blessings in their lives, despite their circumstances. As Emily grew older, her voice only became more powerful, more beautiful. But the family's financial situation grew more dire. Her father lost his job at the factory, and her mother took on multiple cleaning jobs just to make ends meet. Emily, feeling the burden of their struggles, wanted to help. But what could she, a girl in a wheelchair with no means of income, possibly do? It was then that she made the decision to take her music to the streets. She had seen other street performers, musicians, magicians, dancers, making a living by entertaining passersby, and she wondered if she could do the same. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about sharing her gift, about bringing a little light into the world, even if just for a moment. Her parents were hesitant at first. The streets of Manchester could be harsh, especially for a young woman in a wheelchair. But Emily was determined, and in the end, they couldn't deny her the chance to follow her calling. So, every morning, after a quiet prayer at home, Emily would wheel herself to the square, her heart filled with both nerves and excitement. St. Anne's Square was a place of constant activity. Tourists mingled with locals, and the sounds of conversation, footsteps, and the occasional street performer created a lively atmosphere. Emily found a spot near the entrance of the square, beneath the shade of a large oak tree. The ground there was uneven, the cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic, but it was a place where people would see her, where her voice could carry. She set up her small speaker, a gift from her father, and placed a modest sign next to her that read, "Songs of Praise." And then she began to sing. From the first note, it was clear that Emily's voice was something special. It was not just the technical beauty of her singing that drew people in, but the emotion behind it, the depth of her faith, the love she poured into every word. Her voice soared through the square, rising above the noise of the city, reaching the ears of those who passed by. Some people stopped to listen, their busy lives momentarily paused by the sound of her singing. Others walked by, hardly noticing the young woman in the wheelchair. And then there were those who were less kind. On more than one occasion, Emily had been the target of cruel jests. Some people threw coins at her as if she were nothing more than a beggar, not an artist sharing her gift. Others hurled insults, questioning her faith, her worth. Once, a group of teenagers threw rotten vegetables at her, laughing as they walked away, leaving her to wipe the mess from her clothes and face. But through it all, Emily remained steadfast. Her faith was her armor, her voice her sword. She never let the cruelty of others silence her. Never let the hardships she faced shake her belief that God had a plan for her. She sang with a joy that came from deep within, a joy that could not be diminished by the world around her. There were moments, however, when the weight of it all felt almost too much to bear. Late at night, when she was alone in her small room, Emily would sometimes cry. She would pray, asking God why life had to be so hard, why people had to be so cruel. But even in her darkest moments, she never lost her faith. She believed with all her heart that God was with her, that He heard her cries and would guide her through. It was on one such day, when the clouds hung low over the city and a light drizzle fell, that Emily's life would take a turn she never expected. She was singing one of her favorite hymns, a song that spoke of God's unending love and the strength that came from faith. Her voice, as always, was filled with emotion, each note a prayer, each word a testament to her belief. As she sang, a man stood watching her from across the square. He was tall, with graying hair and a kind face, dressed in a simple but well-worn suit. His name was Pastor Jonathan, and he had been the minister at a small church just a few blocks away for many years. Pastor Jonathan was a man of deep faith, known for his compassion and his ability to see the good in everyone. He had spent his life serving God, helping those in need, and spreading the message of love and hope. On this day, Pastor Jonathan had been on his way to visit a sick parishioner when he heard Emily's voice. The sound stopped him in his tracks, the beauty of it cutting through the noise of the city like a beacon. He stood there, listening, his heart swelling with emotion. It wasn't just the quality of her voice that moved him, but the spirit behind it. The sense that this young woman was singing not for herself, but for God. He approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her, and when she finished her song, he knelt beside her wheelchair, looking into her eyes. "Young lady," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "your voice is a gift from God. I've never heard anything so beautiful, so filled with the Holy Spirit." Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, sir," she replied softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I only want to glorify God with the voice He has given me." Pastor Jonathan felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. He had seen many talented singers in his time, but there was something different about Emily. He could feel her faith, her love for God, in every note she sang. "Would you consider singing at my church?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. "We would be honored to have you lead our congregation in worship." Emily was taken aback by the offer. She had never sung in a church before, only on the streets. The idea of standing before a congregation, of leading them in praise, both excited and frightened her. But deep down, she felt a calling, as if God Himself was guiding her to this new path. "I would love to," she said finally, her voice steady with resolve. "I would be honored to sing for God in His house." Pastor Jonathan smiled, his heart filled with joy. He knew that this was no ordinary encounter, that God had brought him to Emily for a reason. As he helped her into his car, ready to take her to the church, he couldn't help but feel that he was witnessing the beginning of something truly special, a journey of faith, of music, and of miracles yet to come. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets of Manchester, Emily looked out at the city she knew so well, her heart full of anticipation. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. Wherever God was leading her, she would follow, her voice lifted in praise every step of the way. And so, With a prayer in her heart and a song on her lips, Emily set off on the path that would change her life forever, a path that began in the streets of Manchester but would soon reach far beyond, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. Part 2. A church filled with praise. The church where Pastor Jonathan served was a modest but beloved sanctuary nestled in a quiet corner of Manchester. It was an old building, its bricks weathered by time and its foundation laid by the faithful generations that had come before. Despite its age, the church had an undeniable charm, a sense of warmth and welcome that embraced everyone who crossed its threshold. The interior was simple: wooden pews that creaked under the weight of those who sat in them, a well-worn pulpit, and walls adorned with crosses and scripture verses that spoke of God's eternal love. But it was the stained glass windows that truly set the church apart. Each one was a masterpiece, depicting scenes from the Bible in vibrant colors that came alive when the sun shone through. The light that filtered through these windows created a kaleidoscope of hues on the stone floor, a moving tapestry of reds, blues, and golds that seemed to dance with the spirit of worship. It was a place where heaven touched earth, where the presence of God could be felt in every beam of light and every breath taken within its walls. When Emily first entered the church, she was struck by its beauty and the peace that filled the air. She had been to church before, of course, but this felt different. There was something sacred about this place, something that made her feel closer to God than she had ever felt before. She could sense the prayers of those who had worshipped here, the hopes and fears that had been lifted up over the years, lingering in the atmosphere like a gentle whisper. The congregation was small but devoted. Most of the members were older, people who had attended the church for decades, their faith a constant presence in their lives. They were a tight-knit community, more like a family than a collection of parishioners, bound together by their shared belief in God and their love for one another. They greeted Emily with warm smiles and kind words, welcoming her as if she were one of their own. On the day of her first service, the church was filled with an air of anticipation. Word had spread quickly about the young woman with the angelic voice who would be leading them in worship. People came early, filling the pews with an eagerness that was palpable. There was a sense of expectancy, a feeling that something special was about to happen. Emily sat at the front of the sanctuary, her wheelchair positioned near the altar, where she had a clear view of the congregation and the beautiful stained glass windows that bathed the room in light. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she waited for the service to begin. This was the first time she would be singing in a church, and the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her. But as the first notes of the prelude began to play, a calmness settled over her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the familiar feeling of God's presence wash over her. She had sung in front of people many times before, but this was different. This wasn't just a performance. It was an act of worship, a way to connect with God and lead others in doing the same. When Pastor Jonathan introduced her to the congregation, he spoke with a sincerity that touched everyone in the room. He told them about the first time he had heard Emily sing, how her voice had moved him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He spoke of her faith, her courage, and her unwavering devotion to God, painting a picture of a young woman who had faced more challenges than most, but had never let those challenges define her. As he spoke, Emily felt a surge of emotion. She had never thought of herself as special. She was just a girl who loved to sing and loved God. But hearing Pastor Jonathan's words, she realized that perhaps her voice could be a gift to others, a way to share the love of God that had always been her anchor. The time came for her to sing, and the church fell into a deep silence, the kind that feels almost holy, as if the very air is holding its breath. Emily took one last deep breath, then began to sing. Her voice filled the sanctuary, rich and full, carrying with it all the emotion, all the faith, and all the love that had been poured into her heart over the years. She sang a hymn that was dear to her, a song that spoke of God's endless grace and the power of His love. The notes soared to the highest rafters, filling every corner of the church with a sound that was both powerful and tender. As she sang, the congregation was transfixed. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others watched her with tears in their eyes, moved by the purity of her voice and the sincerity of her worship. It was as if Emily's voice had the power to reach into the deepest parts of their souls, touching places that had long been forgotten or neglected, awakening a sense of awe and wonder that had perhaps dimmed over time. The stained glass windows, lit by the afternoon sun, cast their colored light across the faces of the people, creating a scene that felt almost otherworldly. The combination of the music, the light, and the palpable sense of God's presence created an atmosphere of worship that was unlike anything the congregation had experienced before. When Emily finished her song, there was a moment of profound silence. It was as if no one dared to speak, afraid that any sound might shatter the sacredness of the moment. Then, slowly, the silence gave way to applause, a gentle, almost reverent sound that grew louder and more fervent as the congregation expressed their gratitude and admiration. Emily, overwhelmed by the response, could only bow her head, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. She had never sought recognition or praise. She had only wanted to sing for God. But in this moment, she realized that her voice had the power to bring people closer to Him, to help them experience His love in a way that words alone could not. After the service, the members of the congregation gathered around Emily, their faces glowing with appreciation and awe. They thanked her, hugged her, and told her how much her singing had meant to them. Many spoke of feeling something they hadn't felt in years, a renewed sense of hope, a deeper connection to God, a reminder of His presence in their lives. One elderly woman, her hair silver and her hands trembling with age, took Emily's hand in hers and looked into her eyes with a seriousness that belied her frailty. "My dear," she said, her voice quavering but filled with conviction, "you have a gift from God. Don't ever stop using it. Your voice can heal hearts and lift spirits. Never doubt that." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I promise," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "As long as God gives me breath, I will sing His praises." Pastor Jonathan watched from a distance, a smile of contentment on his face. He had always believed that music was a powerful form of worship, a way to connect with God on a deeper level. But seeing Emily, hearing her sing, he knew that he had witnessed something truly extraordinary. He felt a deep sense of gratitude to God for bringing her to His church, for allowing him to be a part of her journey. As the congregation slowly made their way out of the church, the light from the stained glass windows began to fade, the colors dimming as the sun dipped below the horizon. But the light that Emily had brought into the church that day, the light of her faith and her music, remained, lingering in the hearts of those who had been there, a reminder of the power of a voice lifted in praise. And so, Emily's journey continued, her path illuminated by the love and support of those she had touched with her music. She had found a new home in this church, a place where her voice could soar, where her faith could grow, and where she could continue to share the gift that God had given her with the world. Her story was just beginning, and though she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She would keep singing, keep praising, and keep following the path that God had laid before her, one note at a time. Part 3. A Test of Faith. Emily's apartment was a modest space, reflecting the simplicity of her life. The walls were painted a soft, pale yellow, though the color had faded with time, and the furniture was a collection of second-hand pieces, functional but worn. The small living room was dominated by an old sofa, its cushions sagging slightly from years of use, and a wooden coffee table that bore the marks of countless mugs of tea. A bookshelf, its shelves bowed under the weight of well-read Bibles, hymnals, and a few treasured novels, stood against one wall. Near the window, where the light was best, sat Emily's pride and joy, a small, upright piano that her mother had saved for years to buy. From her window, Emily could see the bustling street below. The sounds of the city were ever present, from the distant hum of traffic to the chatter of pedestrians passing by. It was a vibrant neighborhood, full of life, but there were times when Emily felt isolated, cut off from the world by the physical limitations of her condition and the quiet loneliness of her modest home. Despite the warmth she had found in the church, Emily's life remained a struggle. The money she earned from singing on the streets was barely enough to cover her rent and basic necessities. Her parents, though supportive, were unable to provide financial assistance, as they too lived on the edge of poverty. Emily often found herself rationing food, stretching every penny, and relying on her faith to carry her through the lean times. The walls of her apartment, though humble, were a sanctuary for Emily. It was here, in the quiet moments between her public performances, that she truly connected with God. She would sit at her piano, her fingers gently pressing the keys as she sang hymns and wrote new songs, her voice filling the small space with melodies that spoke of hope, love, and unwavering faith. The music was her solace, her way of communicating with the divine, and in those moments, she felt a deep sense of peace. But there were also moments of doubt, times when the weight of her circumstances pressed down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. On one such evening, as a cold rain lashed against the windows, Emily found herself staring at the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table. The electricity bill, the water bill, the rent. Each one seemed to mock her, a reminder of the financial burden she could never quite escape. She had always believed that God would provide, but as the days passed and the bills piled up, she began to wonder how much longer she could hold on. Emily wheeled herself to the window, gazing out at the rain-soaked street below. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting a shimmering glow that blurred the lines between reality and the dreamlike state of her thoughts. She had been through so much, born with a disability, living in poverty, facing the daily challenges of life in a wheelchair. And yet, she had never lost her faith. But now, as the storm raged outside, she felt a different kind of storm brewing within her, a storm of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain, "I don't know how much longer I can do this. I've tried to be strong, to trust in your plan, but I'm so tired. I'm tired of struggling, of feeling like I'm just barely holding on. Please give me the strength to keep going. Show me the way, because right now, I can't see it." As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision as she stared out at the world beyond her window. She had always been strong, always kept her faith, but in that moment, she felt fragile, as if her spirit might shatter under the weight of her despair. But even in her darkest hour, Emily refused to let go of her belief that God was with her. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the familiar warmth of prayer to fill her heart. She prayed for guidance, for the strength to continue, and for the faith to trust that God had a plan for her, even if she couldn't see it. The following morning dawned gray and overcast, the rain having given way to a dreary mist that clung to the city like a shroud. Emily awoke with a sense of heaviness, the remnants of the previous night's doubts still lingering in her mind. But as she went about her morning routine, washing, dressing, and preparing a simple breakfast, she felt a small flicker of hope begin to grow within her. She had prayed for strength, and though she didn't yet know how, she trusted that God would provide. After finishing her breakfast, Emily wheeled herself over to the piano. The familiar feel of the keys beneath her fingers brought a sense of comfort, and she began to play, letting the music flow from her heart. It was a hymn she had written herself, a song about trusting in God's plan, even when the path was unclear. As she sang, the words took on new meaning, resonating deeply within her. She was so lost in the music that she didn't hear the knock at the door until it came a second time, louder and more insistent. Startled, she stopped playing and wheeled herself to the door, opening it to find a man standing on the threshold. He was tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and a kind expression. His clothes were well-tailored, and he carried an air of quiet confidence that immediately put Emily at ease. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm and friendly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Emily shook her head, curious about the unexpected visitor. "Not at all," she replied. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, extending his hand. "My name is Daniel Harrison. I'm a music producer, and I happened to hear you singing yesterday in St. Anne's Square. I was passing by, and your voice had stopped me in my tracks. I've been in this business for a long time, and I've never heard anything quite like it." Emily felt her heart skip a beat. She had never expected to be approached by a music producer, especially not one who seemed so genuinely impressed by her singing. "Thank you," she said, her voice tinged with both surprise and gratitude. "I'm honored that you enjoyed my music." Daniel nodded, his expression earnest. "I didn't just enjoy it, Emily. I was moved by it. There's something about your voice. It's not just the technical skill, though you certainly have that. It's the emotion, the faith, the way you sing from your soul. I believe that your music could touch a lot of people, just as it touched me." Emily's mind raced as she processed his words. Could this be the answer to her prayers? A way to share her music with more people, to perhaps earn a living doing what she loved? But even as hope blossomed within her, she felt a pang of uncertainty. She had always sung for God, for the love of worship, not for fame or fortune. Was this truly the path she was meant to take? Sensing her hesitation, Daniel spoke again, his tone gentle and understanding. "I know this might be a lot to take in, and I don't want to pressure you, but I would love to work with you to help you share your gift with the world. We could start with a recording session, see how it feels, and take it from there. No obligations, no pressure, just an opportunity to explore what God might have in store for you." Emily looked into his eyes and saw sincerity there, a genuine desire to help her fulfill her potential. She thought of her prayers, of the trust she had placed in God to guide her steps, and felt a sense of peace settle over her. Perhaps this was the way forward, the path that had been laid out for her, one note at a time. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady with resolve. "Let's do it. Let's see where this path leads." Daniel's face broke into a broad smile, and he nodded enthusiastically. "Wonderful. I'll make all the arrangements. We'll take it one step at a time, and I promise you'll have control over the process. I'm just here to help you share your voice with those who need to hear it." As they talked through the details, Emily felt the last remnants of her doubt begin to fade. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she was not alone. God had answered her prayers in a way she hadn't expected, and she was ready to follow wherever he led. Later that day, as she sat at her piano, playing the hymn that had been her solace just hours before, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The bill still sat on her kitchen table. The challenges of life hadn't disappeared, but there was a light now, a hope that had been rekindled. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it with faith, with music, and with the knowledge that God was guiding her every step of the way. And so, with her heart full of gratitude and her voice lifted in praise, Emily prepared to take the next step on her journey, a journey that would test her faith, challenge her spirit, and ultimately bring her closer to the God she had always trusted with her life. Part 4. The Miracle of Faith. The recording studio was a world unlike any Emily had ever known. From the moment she entered, she was struck by the contrast between its high-tech environment and the simplicity of her life. The walls were lined with acoustic panels, their dark, textured surfaces absorbing sound and creating a sense of quiet that was almost palpable. The room was filled with instruments of all kinds: guitars, keyboards, drums, and more, each one carefully positioned to capture the perfect sound. In the center of it all stood the mixing desk, a massive console bristling with dials, switches, and sliders, all overseen by a team of professionals who moved with the precision and focus of a well-rehearsed orchestra. Emily felt a wave of nervousness as she looked around, the magnitude of what she was about to do sinking in. She had always sung for God, in the streets, in her small apartment, and in the church. But now, she was stepping into a new realm, one that required her to share her voice with the world in a way she had never imagined. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, and for a moment, she wondered if she was truly ready for this. But then she remembered Daniel's words, his promise that she would have control over the process, that she could stay true to the spirit of her music. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was part of the path God had laid out for her, a way to spread his love and message through the gift he had given her. With that thought, her nerves began to settle, replaced by a quiet determination. Daniel was there, of course, guiding her through every step of the process with a patience and understanding that put her at ease. He introduced her to the sound engineers, musicians, and other professionals who would be working with her, each of whom greeted her with warmth and respect. They had heard about Emily, heard about her incredible voice and her deep faith, and they were eager to help her bring her music to life. The first day in the studio was dedicated to familiarizing Emily with the equipment and the space. She sat at the grand piano, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys as she played a few notes, getting a feel for the instrument. The piano's tone was rich and resonant, a far cry from the small upright she had at home, and she felt a thrill of excitement as she realized the potential it held for her music. They began by recording a few simple hymns, songs that Emily had sung countless times before. As she sang, her voice filled the studio. Her words carried on a melody that was both familiar and deeply personal. The engineers adjusted levels, tweaking the sound to bring out the best in her voice, while the musicians accompanied her with a subtlety that enhanced, rather than overshadowed, her performance. As the recording session progressed, Emily found herself slipping into the familiar rhythm of worship. The studio, with its high-tech equipment and professional atmosphere, began to fade into the background, replaced by the same sense of connection she felt when singing in church or at home. It was as if she were alone with God, her voice lifted in praise, the music flowing from her heart with an ease that surprised even her. Daniel watched from the control room, his eyes fixed on Emily as she sang. He could see the transformation happening before him, how the nerves and uncertainty melted away, leaving only the pure, unfiltered expression of faith that had drawn him to her in the first place. He knew, without a doubt, that they were creating something special, something that would resonate with people far beyond the walls of this studio. As the days turned into weeks, Emily grew more comfortable with the recording process. She experimented with different arrangements, adding harmonies and instrumental flourishes that brought new depth to the songs she had known for so long. The musicians she worked with were talented and experienced, and they quickly learned to anticipate her needs, following her lead with a respect that reflected their admiration for her talent. But even as the album began to take shape, Emily remained grounded in her purpose. This was not about fame or recognition. It was about using her voice to glorify God, to share his love with those who needed it most. She prayed before every session, asking for guidance, for the strength to stay true to her calling, and for the wisdom to know how best to use the gift she had been given. One day, as they were finishing a particularly moving hymn, Daniel called Emily into the control room to listen to the playback. As the first notes played through the speakers, Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The sound was rich and full, the blend of her voice with the instruments creating a tapestry of sound that was both powerful and deeply emotional. When the song ended, there was a moment of silence in the control room, the engineers and musicians all turning to look at Emily. She could see the emotion in their eyes, the way they had been moved by what they had just heard. It was a validation of everything she had hoped to achieve, a confirmation that she was on the right path. "That was beautiful, Emily," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with admiration. "I think this is going to touch a lot of people." Emily nodded, unable to find the words to express what she was feeling. She had always known that her voice was a gift, but hearing it like this, hearing the way it could move others, was something entirely new. It was as if she had been given a glimpse of the impact her music could have, the way it could reach into the hearts of those who listened and bring them closer to God. As the album neared completion, Daniel approached Emily with an idea that had been forming in his mind for some time. "Emily," he began, his tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking. This album is something special, something that I believe could change lives. I'd like to organize a concert to launch it, a free event where people can come together to worship and hear you sing. What do you think?" Emily's heart skipped a beat at the idea. A concert, a real, live concert, was something she had never dreamed of. But the thought of sharing her music with so many people, of leading them in worship on such a grand scale, filled her with both excitement and a sense of responsibility. "That sounds amazing," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "But are you sure? I've never done anything like that before." Daniel smiled, his confidence in her evident. "I'm sure, Emily. You've touched everyone in this studio with your voice, and I know you can do the same for an audience. This is your chance to share your gift with the world, to bring people together in praise and worship. I'll handle all the details. You just need to bring your heart and your voice." With that, plans for the concert began to take shape. Daniel secured a venue, a large football stadium that could hold tens of thousands of people, and began spreading the word. As the date approached, anticipation grew, and soon, tickets were completely sold out. Even though the event was free, people were drawn to Emily's story, to the miraculous nature of her journey and the promise of her music. On the day of the concert, the stadium was filled with a sense of anticipation. The sky was clear, the sun shining brightly as people streamed into the venue, filling the seats and the grassy field. There was a buzz in the air, a feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. Emily sat backstage, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she prayed for strength. The sound of the crowd filtering in through the walls made her heart race, but she reminded herself that this was not about her. It was about God, about sharing His love with everyone who had come. She prayed for the courage to sing with all her heart, for the ability to connect with the audience in a way that would bring them closer to Him. When the time came for her to take the stage, Emily felt a mixture of nerves and excitement. Daniel gave her an encouraging smile as he wheeled her to the edge of the stage, the roar of the crowd growing louder as she came into view. The stadium was packed, every seat filled with people who had come to hear her sing, to be a part of this moment of worship. As Emily was positioned at the center of the stage, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes, letting the noise of the crowd fade away. She focused on the reason she was there, the reason she had been given this gift, and felt a sense of calm wash over her. When she opened her eyes, she looked out at the sea of faces, all turned towards her in anticipation, and felt a wave of gratitude. The music began, soft and gentle, the first notes of the hymn she had chosen to open the concert. Emily's voice rose above the crowd, clear and strong, carrying the message of hope and faith that had always been at the heart of her music. As she sang, the audience fell silent, their attention completely focused on her, their hearts opening to the words she sang. The concert unfolded in a way that Emily could never have anticipated. As she moved from one song to the next, the connection between her and the audience deepened. She could feel the presence of God in the stadium, a palpable sense of unity and love that transcended the music itself. People sang along, their voices joining hers in a chorus of praise, their hands lifted in worship as they were swept up in the moment. But it was during the final song of the evening that something truly miraculous happened. Emily had chosen a hymn that was particularly meaningful to her, a song about trusting in God's plan and finding strength in His love. As she sang the final verse, she felt a sudden warmth in her legs, a sensation she had never experienced before. It started as a tingling, then grew into a surge of energy that seemed to course through her entire body. Emily's voice faltered as she realized what was happening, her eyes widening in disbelief. The crowd, sensing that something extraordinary was taking place, fell completely silent, watching in awe as Emily slowly, hesitantly, began to stand. The wheelchair that had been her constant companion, the symbol of her limitations, was no longer needed. Tears streamed down her face as she took her first steps, her legs trembling but strong. The stadium erupted in cheers, the sound deafening as people leaped to their feet, shouting praises to God. Emily walked across the stage, her steps growing more confident with each one, her heart overflowing with gratitude and wonder. She could hardly believe what was happening, but she knew, without a doubt, that this was a miracle, a gift from God that she could never have imagined. As she reached the center of the stage, Emily knelt down, her hands raised to the sky, and began to pray. Her voice, trembling with emotion, was barely audible over the noise of the crowd, but it carried a depth of feeling that resonated with everyone who heard it. "Thank you, God," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you for this miracle, for this gift. I will serve you with all that I am, with every step I take and every note I sing." The crowd followed her lead, bowing their heads in prayer, their voices joining together in a powerful wave of praise that filled the stadium. It was a moment of unity, of shared faith and love, a testament to the power of God's miracles and the strength of a voice lifted in praise. And so, on that stage, under the clear night sky, Emily experienced a transformation that went far beyond the physical. She had been given a new life, a new path, and she knew that she would use every moment of it to glorify the God who had made it all possible. Part 5. God Transforms. Emily's new home was a testament to the journey she had undertaken, a journey of faith, resilience, and miraculous transformation. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood, the house was a modest yet charming bungalow with a garden that burst with color, a reflection of the life and hope that now filled her days. The home was filled with light, the large windows inviting in the warmth of the sun, casting a golden glow across the polished wooden floors and the carefully chosen furniture that spoke of both comfort and elegance. The living room, the heart of the home, was a space that radiated peace. Soft, cream-colored sofas were adorned with plush cushions, inviting anyone who entered to sit and stay a while. A fireplace, its mantel decorated with framed photographs of family, friends, and moments of triumph, served as a focal point. Above it hung a large cross, a constant reminder of the faith that had guided Emily through every trial, every challenge. On one side of the room stood a grand piano, its sleek black surface gleaming in the sunlight. It was a gift from Daniel, a symbol of the success she had achieved, but also a tool for the continued expression of her deepest passion, music. This piano was where Emily spent much of her time, composing new hymns, practicing old favorites, and reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. Her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The miracle that had allowed her to walk had also opened doors she had never thought possible. The album she recorded, born from her time in the studio, quickly became a global sensation. The songs she had poured her heart into resonated with people from all walks of life, transcending boundaries of geography, culture, and circumstance. Her voice, once heard only by those passing through a Manchester square or sitting in a small church, now filled the homes, cars, and headphones of millions around the world. With the success of her album came invitations, offers to perform in venues she had once only dreamed of, requests for interviews, and opportunities to collaborate with some of the most renowned artists in the industry. But despite the fame, Emily remained grounded. She knew that her gift was not hers alone. It was something she had been entrusted with, something she was meant to use for a higher purpose. Every concert she performed, every song she recorded, was dedicated to glorifying God, to spreading His message of love, hope, and redemption. One of the most significant moments in her new life came when she returned to Manchester for a special concert, held in the very stadium where the miracle had occurred. This time, it wasn't just a performance. It was a celebration, a gathering of all those who had supported her, believed in her, and witnessed her transformation. The stadium was filled to capacity, the atmosphere electric with anticipation and joy. As Emily took the stage, she was greeted by a sea of faces, many of whom she recognized from her days singing in the square, from the church congregation, and from her new life as a renowned artist. But it wasn't just the familiar faces that touched her. It was the sight of people from all over the world, drawn together by the power of music and faith. They had come to witness something extraordinary, to be a part of a moment that transcended the ordinary. The concert was a triumph. Each song met with thunderous applause, each hymn sung in unison by a crowd that felt more like a family than an audience. As Emily stood on that stage, her heart swelled with gratitude. She knew that this was not just a celebration of her success, but a testament to the power of faith, the strength of community, and the miracles that could happen when one dared to believe. But even as she basked in the glow of that night, Emily never forgot where she had come from. The small apartment, the worn piano, the days of singing on the streets, those memories remained with her, grounding her in the reality of her journey. She knew that her story was not just one of transformation, but of resilience, of a faith that had carried her through the darkest of times. After the concert, Emily returned to her new home, the echoes of the crowd still ringing in her ears, the warmth of their support filling her heart. She walked through the garden, the cool evening air brushing against her skin, and reflected on all that had happened. The flowers in her garden, vibrant and full of life, seemed to mirror her own journey, once small and struggling, now blooming with the fullness of God's grace. In the weeks and months that followed, Emily's life continued to flourish. She used her newfound wealth to give back to the community that had supported her from the beginning. She funded local charities, supported outreach programs, and provided scholarships for young musicians who, like her, had a dream but lacked the means to pursue it. Her generosity extended far beyond financial contributions. She gave her time, her energy, and her heart, working tirelessly to make a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. One of her most cherished projects was the creation of a music school located in the heart of Manchester. The school was dedicated to nurturing the talents of young people, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds. It was a place where children could come to learn, to grow, and to discover the joy of music, regardless of their circumstances. Emily often visited the school, spending time with the students, sharing her story, and encouraging them to follow their dreams with the same faith and determination that had carried her through her own journey. In her personal life, Emily found happiness and fulfillment as well. She met Daniel not just as a producer, but as a friend, someone who shared her passion for music and her deep faith. Over time, their friendship blossomed into something more, a love that was built on mutual respect, shared values, and a commitment to serving God together. They were married in a small, intimate ceremony, held in the very church where Emily had first sung, surrounded by family, friends, and members of the congregation who had become like family to her. Their marriage was a partnership in every sense of the word. Together, they continued to make music, to lead worship, and to support the causes that were close to their hearts. They traveled the world, spreading their message of faith and hope, but they always returned to their home in Manchester, where they could recharge, reflect, and reconnect with the community that had given them so much. As Emily looked back on her journey, she marveled at the way God had guided her every step of the way. From the streets of Manchester to the stages of the world, from a life of struggle to one of abundance, she had never lost sight of the purpose that had driven her from the very beginning. Her voice, once a source of solace in the midst of hardship, had become a beacon of hope for millions, a reminder that no matter how difficult life may be, God is always with us, guiding us, loving us, and working miracles in our lives. But Emily's story was not just about her. It was about the countless people who had been touched by her music, who had found comfort in her words, who had been inspired by her faith. It was about the community that had supported her, the people who had believed in her, and the God who had never left her side. Her life was a testament to the power of faith, the strength of the human spirit, and the miracles that could happen when we placed our trust in Him. And so, as Emily continued to walk the path that God had laid out for her, she did so with a heart full of gratitude, a spirit filled with love, and a voice that would never cease to sing His praises. Her story, once one of struggle and doubt, had become one of triumph and joy, a story that would inspire generations to come, a reminder that with God, all things are possible. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and experiences. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, God bless you.